Hello and welcome to this review of my KBParadise V80. Many of you have requested this review, and thanks to this donation, thanks mate, I can finally talk about it. It came with some sweets called Sisu, although the boxes use one of those old-style fonts that makes it look like Gifu. Sisu loosely translates to courage, presumably on account of them containing salmiak, but they're actually really nice and very mild little licorice sweets, so thanks for that as well, mate. Anyway, the V80 is available in quite a few slightly different versions, most notably an MX platform with backlighting for around $120 and an Alps platform version without backlighting for $110. The latter is obviously the most interesting as it's one of the very few Alps platform keyboards still being made, and they can make it with Matias Click, Matias Quiet Click, Matias Linear and Fuka white switches, which, by the way, are actually Alps SKCM, so-called simplified Alps switches. This one uses Matias Quiet Click, which I hadn't reviewed yet on this channel. There are a few manufacturers still left who make Alps-style switches, and Matias are probably the most well-known among them. Specifically, the Matias switch is a modification of the simplified SKBM series that Alps brought out to succeed SKCM, which was a lot more complicated because of its use of a 6-part switch plate, while SKBM simply used 2 bare contacts. That said, between the first generation of tactile Alps SKCM switches and the Matias, every single part changed at least once. Although Matias tactile switches, confusingly named Quiet Click, even though it's not clicky at all, are often said to be clones of SKBM switches, they're evidently not. More accurately, they're a cross between tactile SKBM switches with the dampeners from SKCM damp creams, as well as slightly tuned and updated parts. The switches originally had a white slider, but to avoid confusion with their clicky switches, which used the same color, they made them grey afterwards. First of all, a fairly liberal dose of lubricant is added to the switches, both on the tactile leaf as well as to the contacts, which wasn't present in other SKBM switches or SKCM damp cream, and neither is it in Matias's own clicky switches actually, presumably because it would interfere with the click function if it did. Second, the springs are different. SKBM switches, and indeed the early Matias switches as well, used springs that were very thin and which came into resonance when typing on it, which led to a very loud pinging sound, so they eventually made them thicker to rectify the issue. Third, they changed the housing from opaque black ABS to translucent polycarbonate to facilitate backlighting, although virtually no Matias boards actually use backlighting. Its main purpose is for the lock lights, which, on their own boards, use lights inside the keys rather than having a lock light cluster. However, on the original Alps design, the space where the LED goes is the same space that otherwise occupies the tactile leaf, so the two are incompatible. Therefore, in order to maintain tactility as well as an integrated lock light, they use this workaround. Finally, they upgraded the contacts, presumably to gold-coated ones, which, from what I understood, was not the case on the original Alps switches. This massively upped the lifetime from 10 or 20 million to 50 million keystrokes. And on that final bit, I should add the note that this keyboard is defective. Specifically, a whole bunch of keys, namely E, W, 0, K, R, N, O, I, and C, all chatter, i.e. they often register multiple times per key press. Especially E and O, which are also very common letters of course, do it constantly, and it's so bad that often they don't put out just 2 letters, but 3 or even 4, which is unbelievable. It even chatters after you've already typed another letter. That's by far the worst I've ever seen a board chatter. Now, what appears to happen is that apart from registering multiple times on the way down, the switch can also register multiple times on the upstroke, hence why it can trigger so many times and after another key has already been pressed. So, for example, the word on often becomes ono, from becomes frumo, and become becomes bekumi. That said, the board does appear to have its good moments as well as bad ones. Sometimes it works for a few minutes with barely a single problem at all, but still, it was a hell of a testing period for this board. I've checked the soldering, which is fine, and it didn't get fixed when I reflowed the joints, so it's not that. I've tried replacing the E switch with a new one as well, and this fixed it, so it's probably not an electronics issue either, it's to do with the switches themselves. Now, to be fair on Matias, my own two Matias keyboards have never shown any problem whatsoever, and I got the V80 partly because it wasn't working as intended. So it's difficult to say anything about reliability based on this V80, as the failure rate of a board donated because it's broken is obviously 100%. But that said, I haven't given my Matias boards particularly extensive use either, just the 1 week of general use I always give them, and I've read that many people have had chattering issues with their Matias switches, so I thought it's only fair to mention this. Which is pretty strange to me because SKCM switches have a pretty low rate of chattering on average, even after over 20 years. But for these Matias switches, it seems to be commonplace. So why does a switch with a massively upgraded lifetime appear to be massively less reliable? Anyway, I figured I'd just put these things out there and let you draw your own conclusions. So, how do they feel? Well, the tactility is damn solid, that's for sure. Also, the switches are, possibly because of the lubricant, very smooth. They have a medium weighting of around 60 grams of force, and they have a sharp-ish tactile drop of less than half a millimeter. Now, this is both slightly smaller than the 25-gram drop of their clicky switches and considerably less sharp. In fact, Matias Click are easily among the sharpest tactile switches ever produced. But if you've only ever used Cherry MX Blue or Brown or similar, the Matias Quiet switches will still feel comparatively very tactile because the tactility is both twice as strong and twice as sharp as Cherry MX Brown, so it's got some real tactile heft, so to speak. For those who were wondering how they stack up against the original Alps-made SKCM cream dampened switches, you know what, I actually prefer them to the Alps. I mean, sure, these are 2 decades old, but the Matias is just smoother, lighter, and the tactile bump glides a lot more, whereas the Alps have that same kind of rough feel that bamboo SKCM Black and other late Alps switches also have. One thing that Matias switches all share in common is a secondary tactile bump near the bottom of the travel, which is caused by the contact leaf. This feeling is technically also present in complicated Alps, but it's pretty hard to notice, while it's fairly significant on Matias switches. I'd go as far as to say that this second tactile bump is at least as tactile as the entirety of Cherry MX Brown, so you get a 2-event switch, which actually downsizes the feel of the first bump a bit. My own ranking of these switches is a bit ironic because I still prefer the clicky switches, even though I think those are not as good as the Alps original, while I think these are not as good as the clickies, but they're better than the originals, as I mentioned earlier. So, there you have it. Certainly not bad. Also, unlike the clicky switches, which don't sound as good as the complicated Alps clicky switches, presumably on account of the polycarbonate housing, I think these dampened ones actually sound better than the originals. It's a matter of taste, of course, but at least it's indisputable that they sound a lot quieter, as well as much bassier. Here, I'll compare it to an AEK2 with cream damp switches. So yeah, the Alps sound a bit fuller, I'd say, and certainly louder, but I definitely prefer the deep, quiet sound of the Matiases in this case. Except for the spacebar, which is one of the most rattly and high-pitched spacebars I've ever heard in my life. Listen to this. I'm sure you can shut it up with some grease or something, but I mean, come on, this is supposed to be a quiet keyboard. About the keyboard itself, the build is okay, using a fairly taut chassis. It weighs 914 grams in total, which is almost completely due to the chassis, as the case is a very small piece of thin plastic which weighs only 270 grams, including the cable port, making it among the lightest cases I've ever seen. The case is held together with clips along the rim, as well as a single screw at the back, which isn't great, but at least it doesn't have a dozen hidden screws or anything, so that's alright. I'd say overall it's okay, not too bad. One rather annoying thing is that the keyboard uses a detachable cable that's clipped into the bottom here, but it's really difficult to get in because the recess for it, before the cable gutter, is very small, so you have to slide it in under an angle and then press it very hard to get it all the way in. Like this. I mean, I like cable gutters, but this is a bit of a shoddy execution of them, and I've seen it on some other boards as well. The keycaps are lasered, thin beige ABS, just like those that were around in the 8101 era of the Alps heyday, although these use a much smaller font size. According to the keyboard company who sell these keycaps are vintage themed, and indeed it feels strangely appropriate, but I'll admit I don't think they look that good on such a compact black case. Besides, lasered lettering isn't very durable, but you can also get them with black keycaps with infilled lettering, which isn't any more durable really, but at least it looks a little bit better, more composed in my opinion. Still, it's not a bad look overall though, I think. Compared to Matias's own TKL with these switches, the Mini Quiet Pro, it's $20 cheaper at $110 compared to $130. It doesn't have the USB ports that the Matias has, but some people might like the lack of a glossy case, and I'd say compared to the Mini Quiet Pro, it's actually a pretty competitively priced product, I think. Now, at $110, it really isn't more expensive than any other major brand keyboard, such as a Corsair or a Razer or a Logitech, but it's not as cheap as a Chinese clone keyboard, although there are also Chinese manufacturers who make cheap Alps clone switches, such as Taihao and Datacomp. Now, the fact that this keyboard uses a non-MX switch design means that just like Topra, it's carved out a little niche, and it definitely does offer much more tactility than an MX switch. But keep in mind that these are known for reliability issues. Anyway, that's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.